I always knew my mom could be controlling, but I never thought she would actually try to sabotage my wedding. 3 weeks before the big day, everything started falling apart. First, my florist called me in a panic. She said, "I'm sorry, but if you're canceling, I need the cancellation form." I remember staring at my phone, completely confused. "Canceling?" I asked. "I never canceled anything." She paused. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Well, someone called yesterday pretending to be you." At first, I thought it was a mistake. But then it happened again. My photographer said the same thing. Then my makeup artist. Someone had been calling my wedding vendors, pretending to be me, and canceling everything. And the worst part? They knew all the details. The dates. The contracts. The deposit amounts. There were only a few people who knew that information. And when I finally discovered who was behind it, I felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. Because the person trying to ruin my wedding was my own mother. But what she didn't know was this. The day she showed up at the wedding venue, she was walking straight into something she never expected. Growing up, my mom always had very strong opinions about my life. Actually, that's putting it lightly. She didn't just have opinions. She had rules. Rules about what I should wear. Rules about which friends were good enough. Rules about what career I should choose. And if I ever tried to make my own decision, it usually turned into an argument. For most of my childhood, I just went along with it. It felt easier than fighting. But everything changed when I met Daniel. Daniel was different from anyone my mom had imagined for me. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't from a wealthy family. And he didn't try to impress anyone. But he was kind. He listened to me. He supported my dreams instead of trying to control them. To me, he was exactly the kind of partner I had always hoped for. To my mom, he was a disaster. The first time she met him, she barely even tried to hide her disappointment. After dinner that night, she pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You can do better than him." I laughed it off at first. I thought maybe she just needed time to get used to him. But over the next few months, her comments became more frequent and a lot more pointed. She would say things like, "Are you sure he can support you? You've always had big dreams. Don't settle." And my personal favorite, "Marriage is a lifetime decision. Don't rush into something you'll regret." But the real turning point came the night Daniel proposed. It was a quiet evening at the park where we first met. When he got down on one knee, I didn't hesitate for even a second. Of course I said yes. I was happier than I had ever been. But when I called my mom to tell her the news, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. And then she said something that made my heart sink. She didn't say congratulations. She didn't say she was happy for me. Instead, she said quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing, because this feels like a huge mistake." From that moment on, wedding planning didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a battle. And I had no idea just how far my mom was willing to go to stop that wedding from happening. At first, I thought the problems were just normal wedding stress. Everyone says planning a wedding is chaotic. Vendors get busy, schedules change, mistakes happen. So when the first issue popped up, I didn't think much of it. About a month before the wedding, my florist called me. She sounded confused. "Hey, I just wanted to confirm something," she said carefully. "Are you sure you want to cancel the flower order?" I remember freezing. "Cancel?" I asked. "I didn't cancel anything." There was a pause on the line. "Well, someone called yesterday and said they were you," she explained. "They asked about the cancellation policy." I laughed it off at first, thinking it was some kind of mix-up. But then a few days later, it happened again. This time it was my photographer. He emailed me asking why I wanted to move the wedding date. Except, I had never asked that. Then my makeup artist texted me asking if I really wanted my deposit refunded. That's when the panic started creeping in. Because this wasn't just one mistake. Someone was contacting my wedding vendors, pretending to be me. And the strangest part? They knew everything. They knew the wedding date. They knew the contract numbers. They even knew the specific packages I had booked. Those weren't details a random stranger could guess. Only a handful of people had that information. Daniel, my maid of honor, and my mom. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence. But the more calls I received, the harder it became to ignore the pattern. Something was seriously wrong. And whoever was behind it clearly wanted my wedding to fall apart. At first, I refused to believe it. My mom could be controlling, yes. She could be critical. Sometimes even harsh. But sabotaging my wedding? That felt impossible. Still, the pattern was too obvious to ignore. So I decided to do something simple. I called my venue coordinator and asked a question that had been sitting in the back of my mind all week. Do you happen to have the phone number of the person who called pretending to be me? She hesitated for a second. Then she said, actually, yes. Our system logs incoming numbers. My heart started beating faster. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was a screenshot. A phone number. At first, my brain didn't process it. But then I looked closer. And my stomach dropped. Because I recognized that number immediately. It was my mom's phone number. I stared at the screen, hoping, praying that I was somehow wrong. Maybe someone borrowed her phone. Maybe it was some weird coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Still, I needed to hear it for myself. So I called one of the vendors who had received the fake cancellation request. I asked them a simple question. Do you remember anything about the person who called? There was a small pause. Then the vendor said something that made my chest tighten. Well, she sounded older, the woman said. And she kept saying she was the bride's mother, trying to help fix some mistakes. In that moment, everything became painfully clear. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a scam. The person trying to quietly destroy my wedding was my own mother. For a few hours after discovering the truth, I just sat there in silence. My own mother. The person who was supposed to support me on one of the biggest days of my life had been secretly trying to tear it apart. Part of me wanted to call her immediately and demand an explanation. But another part of me knew exactly how that conversation would go. She would deny everything. Or worse, she would twist the story and somehow make it my fault. So instead of confronting her right away, I did something different. I started making calls. First, I contacted every single wedding vendor. The florist. The photographer, the makeup artist, the venue coordinator. I explained what had happened and asked them to put a password on my account. From that moment on, no one could cancel or change anything unless they used that password. Then I told them something else. If anyone calls pretending to be me again, please don't stop them. There was a moment of confusion on the other end of the phone. But then I explained my idea. Instead of shutting my mom down immediately, I wanted to see how far she was willing to go. And more importantly, I wanted proof. The venue coordinator was actually the one who helped the most. She told me their office phones automatically recorded incoming calls for quality and training purposes, which meant that if my mom called again, we would have the recordings. Every word, every lie. By the end of the week, we had exactly what we needed. 3 separate phone calls, all from my mom's number, all pretending to be me, and all trying to cancel different parts of my wedding. But the real twist came a few days later, because my mom texted me out of nowhere. Sweetheart, she wrote. I can't wait for the wedding. I'll be there early to help with everything. I stared at that message for a long time. She had no idea that I already knew the truth. And she definitely had no idea what she was about to walk into. Because when she showed up at that venue, everything was going to change. The morning of my wedding felt surreal. The venue was beautiful. Soft white flowers lined the aisle, the sunlight poured through the tall windows, and everything looked exactly the way Daniel and I had imagined. To everyone else, it was a perfect wedding day. But inside, I was waiting. Because I knew sooner or later, my mom would arrive. And right on schedule, she did. She walked into the venue with the same confident smile she always wore at family events, like she was the one in charge of everything. She hugged a few relatives, complimented the decorations, and even came over to me while I was getting ready. Oh honey, she said sweetly, adjusting my veil. Everything looks wonderful. For a moment, I wondered how someone could pretend so easily. But I kept my composure. Thanks, Mom, I replied calmly. Then I said something she definitely wasn't expecting. Before the ceremony starts, the venue coordinator wants to quickly go over a few vendor details with us. She nodded immediately, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Of course, she said. So the 3 of us walked into a small office behind the main hall. The coordinator closed the door. And that's when everything changed. She turned to my mom and said politely, Mrs. Carter, before we begin, there's something we need to clarify. My mom looked slightly confused. What do you mean? The coordinator calmly picked up a tablet from the desk. Over the past few weeks, she explained, our vendors received several phone calls attempting to cancel wedding services. My mom's expression froze. For a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. But then she recovered quickly. Oh my goodness, she said dramatically. That's terrible. Some people are just awful. I didn't say anything. Instead, the coordinator pressed a button on the tablet. And suddenly, a voice filled the room. A very familiar voice. Hello, this is the bride, the recording said. I'd like to cancel the flower order. My mom's face went completely pale. Because that voice was hers. For a few seconds after the recording played, the room was completely silent. My mom just stood there, staring at the tablet like it had betrayed her. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Then she finally looked at me. Honey, I can explain, she said quickly, her voice shaky now. But there wasn't really anything left to explain. The proof was right there. 3 recordings. 3 different vendors. All the same voice. Hers. The confident, controlling tone she always used when she thought she was in charge. I crossed my arms and looked at her calmly. You called them pretending to be me, I said quietly. She shook her head at first, almost automatically. No, that's not. But the sentence died halfway through. Because we both knew lying wasn't going to work anymore. Finally, she sighed and rubbed her forehead. I was just trying to help you, she said defensively. Help me? I repeated. Yes, she snapped. You were making a huge mistake. I thought if the vendors canceled, maybe you'd slow down and think about what you're doing. For a moment, the old version of me, the girl who spent years trying to please her, felt a familiar wave of guilt. But then I looked down at my engagement ring, and I remembered something important. This was my life, not hers. I took a deep breath and said something I had never said to her before. Mom, you're not helping. You're trying to control me. And today, that control ended. After that conversation, my mom didn't stay for the ceremony. She stood there for a moment, clearly realizing that the situation had slipped completely out of her control. For the first time in my life, she didn't have the final word. Without another argument, without another excuse, she quietly picked up her purse and walked out of the room. And just like that, the chaos she had tried to create disappeared with her. A few minutes later, I walked down the aisle. Daniel was standing at the end of it, smiling like none of the drama in the world could shake him. The ceremony was simple, beautiful, and completely ours. No sabotage. No interference. Just 2 people choosing each other. And as we said our vows, I realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful moment in your life is the one where you finally stop letting someone else control it.